Chiari is a malformation of the cerebellum in which the cerebral tonsils herniate outside of the skull, blocking the pathway of the cerebral spinal fluid. It causes headaches, anything that's involved in the neurological system, so pain in the joints, the feet, the numbness in the hands, issues with the stomach, bladder and bowel issues. Sometimes can be related to that also.
How can you tell someone has Chiari?
In Caroline, her symptoms started around 6 years old. She started having headaches and a ton of nausea, almost like vomiting. Caroline ended up having a head injury. She hit her head on a slide and had a nosebleed, and that didn't correlate. It didn't make sense. And they ran a CAT scan on her, and it was very quick. We found out she had Chiari. She had a herniation of the cerebellum outside the skull. It was 16 millimeters. On some occasions, it's at birth. Nicholas had stridor and reflux and aspirations to where he had to be on thickened liquids. The neurosurgeon that we actually that is now our neurosurgeon currently is in New York, asked me about the other children, and they were all symptomatic. And he said that it would be a good idea to get them all checked. And at that point, in 2008, we found out that all 4 kids had Chiari and its related disorders. But there are families that only one child has it.
So no one knows if it's genetic or?
No, they're doing research right now. Actually, Duke is running a study on the possibility of genetics. So if it's in either the parents or the children, multiple children, they're taking samples, trying to figure out if they can find something. But right now it's just familiar, so it runs in families. My sister-in-law has it. She wasn't diagnosed until after my children, and she went through years of horrendous pain and just heartbreak because she kept telling her parents something was wrong, and they tried to see what it was wrong, but the doctors kept saying it was in her head.
Oh, like
and it was, yeah. And so unfortunately, until my kids were diagnosed, I took an MRI up there, and we found out she had it as well. And then there's also the related disorders, the connective tissue disorders, like Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and that causes the kids to have problems healing. What's happening in Isabel is the odontoid process, the bone in the center that your head pivots on, is actually pressing backwards into the ligament and into the brainstem, causing it's a retroflexive odontoid. And that compression causes issues with vision and headaches, and she has nausea, and so the symptoms have gotten worse, and once they do the decompression, that instability will unfortunately increase, and so we have to do the same thing. So when they do the decompression and they remove the bone to shrink the herniation of the cerebellum, and I know people that have had multiple surgeries there for a long time. Our hope is that in this process that they'll have a better quality of life, less symptoms, and just more freedom, which we've seen in 2 of our other children. Caroline is almost 1 year post-op from a fusion, and at 4 months after that fusion, she felt amazing. I mean, she actually came out of surgery saying, my skull and my neck don't hurt anymore.
I heard that recently after her surgery now she's gone back to school.
She has. She's in school full time for the first time in 6 years, and she's doing really well. She's happy. I mean, she's doing all the things that a normal 12-year-old will do, and but she's just happy, and it's a real smile. One of the things with Chiari kids is they are great at fake smiling. They will not tell you how they feel. They don't want. I think there's so many people that don't understand because they look great. They look healthy. It's an invisible illness, and so they just smile through it.
Jonathan was diagnosed in May of 2010. He had an incidental fall, and so we took him to the ER. They did a CT scan, and they found the Chiari, and so we took him to New York for an evaluation, and at that point he wasn't really symptomatic, so we were going to wait a year and see how it was going. And over the course of that next year, he began having really bad headaches, and it just kept increasing in frequency and severity. So we had another MRI and sent it back to New York, and at that point they recommended surgery, and he had gone from just a normal happy little guy to not even being able to be at school. He's in preschool, not even be able to go to school, and just wanted to just lay on the couch and didn't feel like playing, and was just in pain all the time. And the day we got the diagnosis on Jonathan, I immediately thought of her and got her number and got in contact, and she was actually up in New York at the time with Charlie, I believe. And so she's, you know, kind of helped talk me, you know, explain everything to me on what Chiari was, because it's not, you know, you don't really hear much about it. He was actually decompressed on October 13th of this past year, and then had also back surgery, the tethered cord spinal surgery, 5 days later on the 18th. They recommend surgery when the symptoms become severe and really starts to affect your quality of life, which is what we were seeing with our son. So I think Laurie had mentioned about her sister-in-law is adults will have all this pain for their entire lives, and if the doctors don't order an MRI, then the chances are they're not going to find the Chiari. So they're running all the other kinds of tests, and then they can't find anything. So a big majority of adults are told that they have a mental problem, that it's a mental issue, and that they're really not feeling pain. And unfortunately, for a lot of adults, their symptoms have progressed so bad that they may have problems with walking and some other things like that because the Chiari was left untreated for so long and it was very symptomatic for so long, they just couldn't get anybody to believe them. There's lots of adults that have the decompression surgery. Now, if there's some nerve damage, you know, a lot of that can be irreversible, but what the decompression will do is open up that area where the cerebral spinal fluid will flow more. There's a specific MRI that is done. It's the sine flow, is that what it's called? And you can actually, the doctors can actually see how the fluid is flowing. From what the studies that have shown now, it's not shown to really decrease the life expectancy, but you know, it definitely causes, you know, people can have a lifetime of pain if they don't know about it. There are more and more cases of Chiari being found because more MRIs are being ordered now. And we were lucky in that Jonathan's was found with the CT scan. Had it not been found with the CT scan, we would still not know what's going on with him. The awareness and the research are those are areas that we really need to improve on, which is why we're having this walk. I think.
And when is the walk?
Walk is April 28th at Pecan Park.
2012.
Yes.
In Pecan Park in New Territory, Fort Bend County, Sugar Land, Texas.
Yes. And to really raise awareness and raise money for research, I believe the number is that since 1998, there's been 11 government studies for Chiari. And by comparison, for ALS and Huntington's disease, there's been over 1,700 studies. And while both of those conditions are just as debilitating, they're only about 25% of the people in terms of population have that, as opposed to Chiari. So the Chiari number is so much greater, but there's so much little money being used for research.
When we started all of the surgeries with Caroline, when she had her first surgery, when she was 6, they still were doing the old style surgeries, which a lot of the surgeons in the U.S. still do, which is removal of making the foramen magnum larger, the back of the posterior fossa. They remove part of that skull, and they remove the C1, but they don't decompress the inside of the brain. And I mean, it's changed so much in the last 6 years. Our kids have an incision that runs from the top of their skull to their neck, and it used to be, they called the zipper heads. It's not a very nice name, but most Chiarians are zipper heads. And now Jonathan's surgery is what, 2¼ inch?
Yeah,
I mean, it's really small.
He has about a 2.5 inch incision, you know, up and down right on his neck, going up to the base of his brain. So that's, you know, just in the past, like Laurie said, 6 years.
How many people around the world have been diagnosed with Chiari, you said?
I think it's 1 out of, is it 100,000 or is it less than that? 1 in 10,000. I know it's gotten less. I think it used to be there used to be a much greater number, but I think it may be even 1 in 10,000.
Could be, yeah.
At this point. It changes all the time. It's a malformation. It's a
I think neurological
disorder.
Characterized.
And it all depends. I mean, there's such variations, and but it messes with it's neurological, it's skeletal, it's how everything's made up. Because even though we're all the same, your insides could be all very different. And so,
and the thing about Chiari that's so tricky is, like Laurie said, everything is so different. And Chiari kids usually have, like Laurie's kids do, multiple kind of associated conditions, and that makes surgery that much more complicated. It's not just a normal, you know, the doctors don't see the same thing every time. And that was the case with our son. When he went into surgery, the one of the herniations was different. Then it actually didn't show up on the MRI because it was actually horizontal. And so they didn't know it until they got in there, which is why that finding a surgeon that's very experienced in it is key, because they never know what they're going to see, even though they have all this wonderful state-of-the-art testing.
Yeah.
That until they really get in there and start looking at things, you never know what they may find.
And we felt God's kind of just laid it on our hearts over the last, since Jonathan was diagnosed. I mean, we have just really talked about it back and forth, and I guess it just kind of all came to fruition. We have TexasChiariKids.com. The thing we wanted to do is, because it's been 6 years, we wanted to get a community for families to come to learn about, if you are traveling, how to secure medical flights, which could be free or almost free, how to where to stay, tips and tricks. One of the other reasons for the website, because these parents that are struggling, and the blog, it's our kind of our thing. When the kids would have a bad day and they were feeling bad, it's the Chiari. It's not the kids. Remember, when you're feeling like you're at your wit's end and, oh my goodness, they're, having a day.
To answer about the Ronald McDonald House, just one more point. We really can't say enough about that organization, because when you're in that situation, when your child is undergoing surgery, you're in the hospital, it's a place where you really feel like you're home.
And then the walk is a walk-run on April?
It's a walk-run. We're going to have a 1 mile family walk, in strollers are welcome. It's a paved surface, wheelchairs, it's all accessible. It's a shaded, beautiful walk around Pecan Parks Lake, and it's on
April 28, 2012, here in New Territory.
What day is that?
That's a Saturday. Yeah,
it's a good day.
Registration at 10. We're actually going to have a 5K too. For those who want to run a longer distance, we'll have a 5K, so we'll start them a little earlier. But then a family, like Laurie said, a family 1 mile walk, or however long people are able to do.
Yes, the money is going to ASAP.org. It's an American Syringomyelia and Chiari Alliance project.
And that's based in New York?
Yes. They started, I believe, I think it is.
Their main office is actually in Longview, Texas.
Yeah.
And they're really striving to gain more studies and research in that, and that's one of their main focuses, is not only the awareness but the research, to get more studies so we can learn more about this. The more we know, the more they can figure out the better ways to treat and keep moving forward.
Yeah. And they're a nonprofit organization that started in 1998.
One of the hardest things about Chiari is to be able to understand what the symptoms you're seeing in your child. That's why we're really trying to build this community of all the Chiari parents, so we can discuss things like this. Really it's trial and error, and what we did was made logs of what behaviors we were seeing, and when we would give him medicine, to try to kind of see a pattern on, are we seeing an increase in the frequency of all this?
Yeah, one of the things that we noticed in our children is their pupils dilate very large. It's a fight or flight response, but it's also a pain response. It's their body's response to pain before they respond to pain. Not only the mood changes, but then their pupils are large. And so it's like, my girls are pretty even keeled, and then it would be like one of them would do this and they would go, ah! And it was just like the craziness came out, and you look at them and you can see there's a difference in their face.
And with Jonathan, we could always tell noises would bother him. Just me talking on the phone, Mommy, that's too loud, that's too loud.
And it breaks your heart.
Yeah, and he would cover his ears, and then you knew that, just a normal conversation like this was too loud for him. He would have such complete meltdowns that we'd have to just bear hug him and just hold him until the medicine would kick in to help calm him down.
Trying to get on our website is different tricks and tips that have helped us with our children. One of the things about Chiari is that the kids are normal children who want to be normal and strive every day to feel good and be able to really smile. And I don't know, it's hard to believe that between the 5 children there have been 20 brain and spinal surgeries. Right now we're in a really nice period.